It's your boy Hoon Boom, and I'd like to start this segment off with a moment of silence. Thank you for that. Appreciate TikToker Crime Time Tea Time for putting that together. I am your boy Hoon Boom, and this is the Hold Up Show. And hold up, are we truly safe? Today we're going to be going over a series of videos and articles regarding this tragedy that have so far been released to the public.
Breaking news.
And let's go through it.
Called over to my counterparts at the White House, and I can confirm that President Trump has been made aware of this situation. And tragically, it appears that a military helicopter collided with a regional jet at DCA Airport right here in Washington, D.C. That's all I can confirm at this point in time. And I can just say that the thoughts and the prayers of the entire Trump administration are with all those that are involved. And we ask the public in this area to please stand by for guidance from law enforcement and allow them to do their jobs as they attempt to save lives right now.
So that was one of the first reports from official reports released from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told Fox News' Sean Hannity that President Trump is aware of the situations, calling the situation tragic. Then there was an ABC News report of what to know about the deadly American Airlines and Black Hawk helicopter collision. Let's get into that.
Investigation, as we know, is going on in full force right now, and pilots across the country have been asking the same questions that we are asking. What happened? Retired Black Hawk instructor pilot Martin Gotholm joining me now. Martin, I guess, you know, we'll get to the Black Hawk and just military training and these types of exercises that take place all the time for the sake of readiness. But just from what you know, and you've taken off and landed at this exact airport, the same runway, from your experience and what you know about comms and the aircraft and military exercises like this, what are your thoughts right now as we are asking so many questions?
Kara, our unit deployed for that mission up in D.C. After I retired, but I talked to a friend of mine, a fellow instructor pilot, and he said when the helicopters come down that route, altitude deconfliction is really the only safety factor. So the Black Hawks were supposed to be 200 feet and below. They tried not to get too low. They'd get complaints. They'd usually split at about 100 feet. And that should provide plenty of altitude separation between helicopters and any aircraft coming in to land on the runway, because TCAS, which alerts the pilots, or converging flight paths, weren't a consideration because of the congestion. So there were times when aircraft would be going right over the helicopters. So really altitude deconfliction was the only safety. And it appears that the one or more of the crews deviated from that altitude.
And how does that happen? Because you're supposed to all be on the same comms, right? The American Airlines, the helicopter, the air traffic control operators. So what would cause a deviation?
Pilot inattention, pilot error. And I'll tell you, when you're flying under night vision goggles, it's great when you're out in the desert. It's magnifying ambient light 2,000 to 3,000 times. But when you're in a congested city area with a lot of light, the goggles can actually be a hindrance. You can actually flip them up and just fly visual. And it would have been very hard, if they were under goggles or not, for them to see that aircraft coming in. So when the air traffic controller said, Pat 25, do you have the CRJ in sight? They may have been looking down at the other runway that they normally land at, the airplanes, north-south roughly, and been looking somewhere else and not even seen that aircraft, but maybe saw another. And there's going to be a lot of things in the chain of sequences that they always talk about can be broken. In hindsight's 2020, but had the controller said, Pat 25, you've got a CRJ at your 11 o'clock half mile, same altitude converging, do you have it in sight? And then say, pass behind, maybe that would have avoided the accident, right? It would have been a lot more immediacy. But it was, even if nobody had been talking, the altitude separation should have prevented this accident.
So it's possible, with all the ambient light, all the light, the sources of light that were presented in that moment, that the pilot could have misidentified the airline traffic. Is that possible?
Certainly, or not even really been able to see it. When he acknowledged, he may have had another aircraft that he was looking at. And I'll tell you, it's very hard under goggles in that kind of highlight area. So should have been, if they weren't at 200 feet and below, then it was clearly pilot error. But obviously, there's going to be a thorough NTSB investigation to figure out all the causes.
And just to hammer the point home, just because this was a training mission, look, that's a part of the military mission, readiness. You're training all the time. These weren't rookie pilots. So I think that's important to point out that, this was a crew that had been, launching and landing numerous times. It wasn't like a first flight out.
Certainly. I mean, they're all flight school grads. They're experienced pilots. They'll look at how much experience. But training missions, especially post 9/11, take place all the time. You're flying all the time in the military to keep your skills. So it wasn't like it was a new pilot being trained. It was just two pilots out on a training mission with a crew
and you
chief.
talk about, well, and you pointed out the congestion, and we know, I mean, this is one of the busiest airports in the country. Let's talk about the challenges when you are in an airspace like this. You've got the Pentagon right there. There's the airport. There's all the monuments. I mean, there's so many things in such a tight, specific area. That's got to be a challenge as a Black Hawk pilot, yes?
Oh, yes, and certainly any pilot. So in real congested airspace, like I said, the TCAS on board the CRJ might have alerted the pilots, but they're listening to the same tower controller that the pilots were. And they heard those guys acknowledge, the Army pilots, that they had them in sight and that they would pass behind. So at that point, these guys are on short final, the CRJ pilots, and all their concentration is landing the aircraft.
You make a good point that, these were experienced pilots. They were on a required annual nighttime evaluation. How often do these pilots have to train on these types of missions, and how much experience does a pilot typically have before taking on one of these nighttime training missions?
So the experience varies, but you always have, much like you have a captain and first officer, you always have a pilot and commander and instructor pilot in charge of the flight. So it's not for lack of experience. We train all the time, whether you're National Guard, Reserve, or active duty. You have the same minimum flight standards as far as the hours, the types of flying you have to do, the minimum flight hours for night vision goggles. So post 9/11, the training went through the roof. As a National Guard pilot here in North Carolina, it was my second full-time job. I flew all the time.
Oh, it's heartbreaking for the community, I know, but I sure appreciate you joining us just with your background and your insight, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, that was the ABC report
Breaking news
of
coverage of every minute.
everything to know about the crash that happened. Here is the second official statement from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. Let's get into it.
Breaking news, I have called over to my counterparts at the White House, and I can confirm that President Trump has been made aware of this situation. And tragically, it appears that a military helicopter collided with a regional jet at DCA Airport right here in Washington, D.C. That's all I can confirm at this point in time. And I can just say that the thoughts and the prayers of the entire Trump administration are with all those that are involved. And we ask the public in this area to please stand by for guidance from law enforcement and allow them to do their jobs as they attempt to save lives right now. Breaking news.
Then President Trump released a statement through his Truth Social network. The airplane was on a perfect and routine line of approach to the airport. The helicopter was going straight at the airplane for an extended period of time. It is a clear night. The lights on the plane were blazing. Why didn't the helicopter go up or down or turn? Why didn't the control tower tell the helicopter what to do instead of asking if they saw the plane? This is a bad situation that looks like it should have been prevented. Not good. And if we say that he put emphasis on it is a clear night, so then we have a video of a statement from Secretary of Defense Hegseth. Let's see what he has to say.
All right, update this morning. Just got off the phone with the Southcom commander and the chairman, the Joint Chiefs, talking about our efforts at Guantanamo Bay. That is ongoing. We're leaning forward on supporting the president's directive to make sure that we have a location for violent criminal illegals as they are deported out of the country. No one's going to wait on the Defense Department, and we're working that in real time. But I also wanted to give an update on the tragedy that happened last night here in Washington, D.C., and provide a little bit more information as we are actively working to investigate and understand what occurred and why. At about 8:48 last night, a UH-60 assigned to the U.S. Army Aviation Brigade in the Military District of Washington, Fort Belvoir, Virginia, collided tragically with a civilian airliner. The unit involved, the Army unit involved, was Bravo Company 12th Aviation Battalion at Fort Belvoir. It was an annual proficiency training flight. And when we look at the crew, and not all kin have been notified, so we're going to withhold ranks and names at this point. We do know on our side who was involved. It was a fairly experienced crew. and that was doing a required annual night evaluation. They did have night vision goggles. The 12th Aviation Battalion, as of now, is granted a 48-hour operational pause on contingency missions as what happened is reviewed, and a senior level aviation team, an investigative team from our Aviation Safety Center, was deployed last night and already is in Washington, D.C. to investigate what's going on. We anticipate that the investigation will quickly be able to determine whether the aircraft was in the corridor and at the right altitude at the time of the incident. As I mentioned, next of kin notifications are ongoing. It's a tragedy, a horrible loss of life for those 64 souls on that civilian airliner, and of course, the 3 soldiers in that Black Hawk. They're in our prayers, their families and their communities as people are notified. I can't imagine. And I know it's gone from a rescue mission to a recovery mission, and we're with all the first responders that are moving actively too. So at the Defense Department, our thoughts and prayers go out. We are actively investigating to find out what happened and why. And as we get updates, you will have them. God bless.
So next we have another Fox News clip. I am not necessarily sure who's talking, but let's chime in.
Up on, as someone who does train pilots, can you walk me through why on earth we would be conducting a training mission, training exercise, so near an active and fairly busy airport at night like this? Is that common?
Well, this is a military flight. Of course, this is going to operate, under different rules than a regular training flight. But it's, for instance, airline flights and other flights are conducting training all of the time. In fact,
Correct.
When a new captain is getting upgraded, he has to get his line operating experience. And so actually, those are flights with passengers where you'll have a co-pilot upgraded to captain and you'll have a check pilot on board training him. So even the airlines are frequently conducting training just, in the day in and day out of their job. That part is not that unusual. But, of course, what we're really looking into here is how did it penetrate the altitude that airliner was at? Because it appears, looking at the flight tracking, looking at the flight path, looking at the airspeed, the altitude, the approach to that runway, that the airliner was where it was supposed to be.
Yeah, especially, frankly, Kathleen, if it's at like 350, 400 feet up, that is higher than I would imagine that Black Hawk should have been, to say nothing of the fact that some of the video I've seen seem to suggest it was coming in black, as in lights out. And I'm trying to figure out any number or any manner of reason or explanation for that, but I don't want to dive too much into the speculation. What I would rather do is have you walk us through what happens now. We're looking at live pictures on the right side of our screen, courtesy our Fox affiliate in Washington, WTTG. We have seen some of the staff there pulling pieces of what appear to be fuselage out of the water and then placed onto carts and then loaded up. Tell me what happens there and what we might see over the next several hours as we look forward to daybreak.
Well, as we move into this investigation, of course, not only are we going to have the NTSB involved in the FAA, but we're actually going to have the U.S. military. So that makes this a rather unique investigation. And, of course, we'll make this one of the most investigated accidents probably to come in history. What they'll do is they'll take the pieces of the aircraft and recreate them. They'll take them and put them probably into a large empty hangar and try to rebuild that aircraft as best as they can, and also with whatever is left of the debris from the helicopter. And, of course, they're looking for the black boxes from the airliner. We do not know at this point if the Black Hawk has any kind of recording device for its data or for the cockpit voice. But we do know that the PSA CRJ jet will have that on board, and that one fortunate aspect is that the Potomac in that area is quite shallow, in some places less than 10 feet. So it would probably be expected that they will recover the 2 black boxes, the data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder quite shortly, hopefully.
Lastly, let me ask you about the training idea for, say, helicopter pilots. You made mention of the fact that there are different rules for the military versus, say, commercial. And yet I'm curious, are you surprised, as perhaps many others have been, that this could happen? Sort of walk me through how something like this might have happened. I've heard someone speculate it could have just been a lack of communication from the ATC.
Well, we may find out that the helicopter was doing what's called see and avoid. It may have been operating under visual rules where they were given directions to look for this traffic and then visually see and avoid, which, of course, is challenging. You're over an ocean of lights, essentially. You've also got the Dark River. You've got lots of different aircraft. And so what they're going to be looking at is on those audio transcripts is, did the Black Hawk crew actually report seeing this aircraft? And if so, trying to piece together, were they actually looking at something else, or did they not fully respond? We don't know that yet. But this is an incredibly busy airport. They sometimes say that the north-south runway at D.C. Is the most active runway in the United States. They had 25 million out of their last year. That was record. Same amount at Dulles, but Dulles you have much more space, much more runways, longer runways. So, the question is going to be asked is, are we getting to capacity at Reagan National? And this has been asked before, but actually what we're seeing is the flight numbers increasing the last few years and projected, at least before this accident, to increase for next year, and the addition of international flights, which normally you don't see a lot of out of that airport. So that's the big question that's going to be asked is, what are we going to do with the extreme heavy amount of traffic that we have going in and out of this airport, and how are we going to coordinate that with these military training flights and just the surveillance that goes on in D.C., even with civilian helicopters.
Right. Especially when you're dealing with, as you pointed out, very short porches out there, 6,800, 6,900 feet. Not a lot of space, to be honest with you. Kathleen Bangs joining us tonight. Thank you so much for your time, and stick around. We'll see if we can't get more from you as we continue our coverage. But for now, over to my colleague, Jonathan Hunt.
Yeah. So then we had a Yahoo News fact check that no, Barack Obama wasn't on Army helicopter that crashed into American airline plane. And it's like, why would Yahoo News feel the need to release that report? Was it that much circulation that he may have been on this Black Hawk? So then we have this report from CBS News that I want to get into. Experts asked why Black Hawk helicopter may have been flying above allowed altitude before crash. The military Black Hawk helicopter that crashed into a passenger plane near Reagan National Airport Wednesday appears to have been flying above the permitted altitude. Publicly available flight data analyzed by CBS News shows this data point is one of the several key mysteries investigators are exploring as they seek to explain what caused the nation's worst air disaster in more than a decade. Aviation experts say that $64 million question that needs to be answered, says Greg Frey, a former senior air safety investigator with the National Transportation Safety Board, in an interview with CBS News. The permitted flight ceiling on the Potomac River near Reagan National Airport is 200 feet, a crucial ceiling for keeping the heavy flow of military helicopters safely clear of the steady commercial aircraft traffic into and out of the nation's capital. Data from Flight Radar 24, which tracks and records aircraft data of most flights across the U.S., showed the helicopter's last estimated altitude was about 400 feet when it crashed. The jet's altitude was about 375 to 400 feet, according to data from Flight Aware and Flight Radar 24. They're military pilots. They're familiar with the routes, Frey say. Why is it on this day and on this flight that they were as much as 150 to 200 feet higher than they knew they should be? Unquote. Stephen B. Wallace, a former director of accidents and investigations of the Federal Aviation Administration, told CBS News he believes investigators will direct attention to the altitude of the Black Hawk. I don't want to speculate on the cause, but I can speculate what's going through the minds of investigators, Wallace said. I think that it is very likely going to be the focus. Unquote. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said the investigation is examining if the aircraft was at the right altitude at the time. NTSB investigators have not so far disclosed the helicopter's altitude in their briefings and said their working groups will evaluate, quote, pre-impact course and altitude, end quote. The Army helicopter's deviation above the flight ceiling is one of the several similar near collisions involving helicopters at Reagan National that date back more than a decade. A near mid-air collision between an airplane and a helicopter in July 2015 occurred 400 feet off the ground on approach to the same runway being used in Wednesday's crash, runway 33. That does not sit well with me. According to a CBS News data team review of an anonymous report of the NASA's Aviation Safety Reporting System, the pilot report said the aircraft came within very close contact of another aircraft. This occurred about 400 feet off the ground to the point where the pilot monitoring had to take the controls to make a correction in order to prevent it from becoming a mid-air collision, the 2015 report says. 2 years earlier, in 2013, a pilot reported problems with a helicopter while circling to land on runway 33. That is a shorter runway intended for smaller aircraft like Airline 5342. Pilots who land there told CBS News they want to be at the floor or the lowest altitude during their approach because they need to hit the beginning of the runway to have maximum distance to stop. As we continue our approach, Tower instructed the helicopter to make a right 360 for a jet on a 2-mile final for runway 33 and to report to him in sight, the pilot wrote. The Tower then asked the helicopter if he had us in sight. He replied yes, and the Tower told him to maintain visual separation. The report said, as we began our turn from base to final, the helicopter made what looked like a right turn directly into our flight path. The pilot reported having to execute a hard right turn and abort the approach to avoid a collision. I'm not sure how close we came to the helicopter since it was on the left side of the aircraft, but I would guess it was only a few hundred feet, the report said. CBS News reviewed NASA safety data identified at least 9 near mid-air collisions at the airport since 2005, including 3 involving helicopters. Frey said he believes investigators from the NTSB and the military will be examining the altimeters in the helicopter to see if they malfunction, checking for any wind impact that could have hindered the pilot's ability to hold the helicopter at 200 feet, and exploring whether or not the crew should have been using night vision goggles. He said the flight recorders on both aircraft will be helpful in determining what happened. Authorities reported that they have been removed from Potomac River on Thursday. If they had been at 200 feet, there wouldn't have been an issue because the plane typically would have been around 400 to 500 feet off the ground. Frey said those two RJ regional jet pilots didn't know what hit them until the helicopter hit them. So yeah, that was a CBS News report. Now, I know this is sensitive material, but we have the clearest newly released footage. Let's give it a review. Then we have a report from the New York Times. Staffing was not normal at airport tower, according to the preliminary FAA report. Staffing at the air traffic control tower at Reagan National Airport was not normal for the day of time and volume of traffic, unquote. According to the internal preliminary Federal Aviation Administration safety report about the collision that was reviewed by the New York Times, the controller who was handling helicopters in the airport's vicinity Wednesday night was also instructing planes that were landing and departing from its runways. Those jobs typically are assigned to 2 controllers rather than 1. This increases the workload of an air traffic controller and could complicate the job. The one reason is that the controllers can use different radio frequencies to communicate with pilots flying planes and pilots flying helicopters, while the controller is communicating with pilots of the helicopter and the jet. The 2 sets of pilots may not be able to hear each other. So then there's another two videos I would like to review. Lockheed Martin released a demonstration video of remote Black Hawk technology 2 weeks before the 2024 election. Let's review that video.
Working hand in hand with the Army to modernize Black Hawk, to incorporate new technology, new capabilities to create the Black Hawk of the future. And one critical technology of all these things is autonomy. And that brings me here today.
Are we really going to fly this optimally piloted autonomous Black Hawk in Connecticut from 300 miles away right here in Washington, D.C.? And the answer is a resounding yes, we're going to.
You're going to see the aircraft come up to a stabilized hover, and this is going to simulate contested logistics operations where we would have a ground crew hooking up a sling load to the aircraft.
And this aircraft is holding position remarkably well.
So as you can see at the very end there, fully autonomous helicopters will revolutionize, driven by its Matrix flight system. Then we have a video released 2 years ago from Veteran Always.
Your eyes are not playing tricks on you. There's no pilot inside this helicopter. It's 2022, so let's face it, we're used to seeing all types of vehicles operate themselves. From cars to boats, drones, even motorcycles. But some people might say there's something a little ominous about seeing a military-grade helicopter flying without a pilot. This is part of a project from Lockheed Martin's subsidiary, Sikorsky, and DARPA. Now, if you're not familiar with DARPA, it's a research and development agency for the U.S. Department of Defense. And according to DARPA, this marked the first time a Black Hawk helicopter flew without anyone on board.
So yeah. Now that we have seen as much as I could find that was relevant to my question of, are we truly safe? Do we even now truly feel like we are given transparency in a situation, in a tragedy of such like this? We seen the clearest video released of the collision. It is as if neither seen each other at all. There was not, from my eyes of looking, any type of diverting, even at the last second. Which gives me pause to ask, was there soldiers, experienced pilots, piloting this Black Hawk? Was it commandeered somehow remotely from these experienced pilots. Why every tragedy, accident, mishap of military involvement tied to the word training? I'm just speaking allegedly. These are just questions that freshly on my mind as I look at all these videos and the reports and the evidence that's being provided officially and on broadcasted networks. Because you have to catch the raw reporting when it first happens, store it and absorb it before they pretend like they didn't say it, or it didn't happen, or it didn't go that way, or the new report says it's now this. You have to remember and absorb all that info to see what's being said. When the president truths out, capital letters, clear night, that does not give a ringing endorsement that this was accidental of any sort. When there are reports that the helicopter was operating at 150 to 200 feet above its ceiling, you mean to tell me that America, who has the most sophisticated military equipment in the world, that its helicopter could not alert its two experienced pilots running a training that they are at 400, 350 feet above the ground or above land level? If you could not see anything at night in night goggles, why weren't they taking off from two experienced pilots? These are just questions rawly on my mind. So yeah, I want to know your thoughts. Like, comment, subscribe, share, subscribe, share. But are we truly safe? How many training accidents are going to kill more innocent people, children, civilians, unknowing Because I just believe, like, last year, didn't it just a ship took out a bridge and killed all these innocent people, and there was no real explanation. Oh, the ship just broke down. It was circling around when it were where it wasn't supposed to, and that was just that. And it's just, bro. Prayers to all victims of all these tragedies. Let me know your thoughts. Boom Boom, Hold Up Show. Are we truly safe? Peace out.